Jobs Friday. So that means we have employment numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that came out today for the month of April. And as an economist, I want to walk you through the numbers because there's a lot more behind the scenes than I think the headlines are leading on. So for the month of April, it is reported that employers added about 115,000 jobs, which was higher than the expected 65,000 jobs that economists predicted. And unemployment ticked up ever so slightly from 4.26% to 4.34%. And this alongside the revisions made to the jobs numbers from February and March. And this happens all the time because it's based on employers sending in their data. So once we get more information, the Bureau of Labor Statistics adjusts the numbers from prior months. In the last 3 months, we have added about 48,000 jobs. And economists agree that this is around the break-even rate. It's the amount of jobs necessary to be able to sustain new people going into the labor market. But I want to give some perspective about how that number relates to prior periods in our history. So if we look at the job growth between February and April of 2024, we gained about 726,000 jobs in those 3 months. And that compares again to February through April of 2026, where we gained just 44,000 jobs. But I think what's important to note is that the growth and the decline in jobs across sectors has been unequal, especially in the last couple of years. Specifically, if we look at healthcare, right? If you are a part of the healthcare industry, that industry has been fueling a ton of the jobs over the last year. So just in the month of April, healthcare gained nearly 37 of the 115,000 jobs in the month of April. And if we're looking at the last 12 months, on average, healthcare has gained nearly 32,000 jobs every month, mostly with jobs in residential care facilities. And sectors like the finance sector and the information sector, which includes the tech industry as well as the media industry, have lost jobs over the last few months. I will also note here that it's way too early for us to be able to see how what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz and Iran, how that is affecting jobs numbers, right? It takes a while for these numbers to kind of bake into the economy. Inflation numbers are a little bit more directly related to that, but we wouldn't expect to see any changes to unemployment based on what's going on over there. There are some other really interesting numbers from the jobs report that I want to specifically talk about that I think are really interesting and pertinent to where we are right now. The first is something called the U6. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but the unemployment rate, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases those numbers, they actually release 6 different estimates from U1 to U6. The media typically report on something called the U3. U3 measures unemployed people, but it doesn't include things like discouraged workers, right? People who have just stopped looking for work. It also doesn't include people who take on part-time work, but would rather be taking on full-time work. So the U6 actually captures that metric. And what we find is that in the month of April, that number ticked up slightly from 8.0 to 8.2%, which reflects, in light of all of the other numbers, the fact that a lot of people are accepting part-time work when they actually would want full-time work. And if we compare that number from April 2025 to April of 2026, that has been increasing from 7.8% in April 2025 to 8.2% in April of 2026. The other thing I want to talk about that I think is very interesting about this particular jobs report is wages and wage growth. So when we get unemployment numbers, we actually also get information about how wages have changed over the last month. And in April of 2026, wage growth actually ticked up slightly to about 3.6% year over year. And that number in a vacuum sounds really great, right? We want our wages to increase because we want our buying power to increase, but our buying power can't increase if it is not keeping up with measurements of inflation. Now, we don't actually have the inflation numbers for April of 2026. Those are going to come out sometime next week, and we will talk about them next week. But we do have inflation measurements for March of 2026, both the CPI as well as the PCE. And when we look at those metrics, CPI year-over-year growth in March is about 3.3%. The PCE year-over-year in March is about 3.5%. 3.3 and 3.5% are very, very close to 3.6%. A lot of economists would say a little bit too close. The concern, right, is that if those two numbers, right, wage growth and inflation, get a little bit too close, and they even worse if they cross, that means that workers will see the value of their wages decline rather than increase. And ultimately, when people talk about the affordability crisis, that's ultimately, I think, what they're trying to get at. The fact that their wages aren't keeping up with the rising increase in prices. But again, it will be much more interesting to see how wage growth has kept up with inflation, if it has, once we have the more recent numbers from April, which should come out next week. So we will just have to see how that all plays out. But for now, that's all I got. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.